I told my boyfriend that if he grabbed the steering wheel while I was driving one more time, I would leave him on the side of the road, and he tried to call my bluff a few days ago. Jason was invited to a house party hosted by his work wife, and when I asked if I could come along, he said no. According to him, because I don't like to drink, I would ruin everyone's mood and become known as a buzzkill among his work crowd, so him not letting me go was actually doing me a favor. Well, I got a call from him about 6 hours later. He was completely drunk and begging me to come pick him up. It was 2 a.m., and his call had just woken me up, so I groggily asked him what happened to the money I gave him for a taxi. Well, it turns out that Ashley, his work wife, was hungry, so they went to a nearby pizza place, and he bought her food. He didn't just buy her food. He bought her an extra-large pizza, 3 sides, dessert, and a drink. I was completely confused but decided that getting him home safely was more important, so I jumped in the car and drove 45 minutes to Ashley's house. I finally got there and called Jason, but he didn't answer. It took 7 phone calls before he picked up, and when he got in my car, he said he was sorry, but Ashley needed help finding a necklace that she had lost. I told him to forget it and started driving, but as soon as I did, he started yelling in my face, "That party was awesome. Ashley is so funny. You should have seen her imitating you." Then he started laughing, and in the middle of his laughter, he grabbed the steering wheel for the first time. I was sleepy and annoyed and not in the mood, so I quickly pulled his hand away and pulled over. I flatly told him that I wasn't in the mood for this nonsense right now, and if he tried to grab the steering wheel again, I would dump him on the side of the road, and he could walk back to Ashley's. He just mocked me, saying, "Ashley says you're all talk, that's why your mouth is so big, huh? I won't do it, you love me too much." I finally started the car again, but I hadn't even been driving for 2 minutes when he grabbed the steering wheel again, though. He didn't just grab it, he grabbed it and yanked. The car eventually skidded to the right, hit the curb, and plowed into a large bush. I panicked and started screaming, and only when the car was in the bush did Jason let go of the steering wheel. He was laughing hysterically, mocking me, don't do it again, don't do it again. Ooh, see, this is why you're no fun." Luckily, the car was still okay apart from a few scratches on the hood, and I managed to back out of the bush. I told him to get out of the car because I would be driving home alone, and he just looked at me like I was joking, but I wasn't. I told him seriously that either he gets out of the car or our relationship is over. He kept blaming me for not understanding the joke and told me that he wouldn't get out of this car unless I made him. I didn't know what to do, so I decided to trick him out of the car by telling him that I could feel a tire going flat. I kindly asked him to get the spare tire from my trunk so I could change it, and I convinced him by promising to do something special if he went out and got it for me. Well, as soon as he got out of the car, I hit the gas and drove off. I got home 30 minutes later, and I just cried for the rest of the night. Jason actually showed up at my front door 8 hours later, soaking wet and covered in mud. He said he didn't remember anything that happened and asked why my car had so many scratches. I'm not sure if I should forgive him. Jason kept asking me questions about what happened the night before. He was sitting at my kitchen table still wearing the dirty clothes from walking home. I told him everything about picking him up from Ashley's house, him grabbing the steering wheel twice, and the car crashing into the bush. His expression changed as I explained, and I could tell he was starting to remember. He was silent for a moment, then suddenly slammed his hand on the table. He said I was completely wrong to leave him on the side of the road in the middle of the night. He kept going on about how dangerous it was and how anything could have happened to him. I reminded him that he was the one who put both of us in danger by grabbing the steering wheel while I was driving, but he wouldn't listen. I tried to explain how I had warned him multiple times about touching the steering wheel, how terrified I was when the car skidded and hit the bush, and how his drunken laughter made everything so much worse, but he just shook his head and got angrier and angrier. Then, he started pacing around my kitchen, saying that a real girlfriend wouldn't abandon her boyfriend on the road no matter what he did. He brought up Ashley again, saying she would never do something like that to her boyfriend. That really annoyed me. After everything that happened at the party, he was still comparing me to her. I kept my cool and told him that a real boyfriend wouldn't endanger his girlfriend's life by grabbing the steering wheel while she's driving, especially after she had specifically asked him not to. I also mentioned how he had refused to let me come to the party because I don't drink, then spent the money I gave him to buy Ashley an expensive meal. He got even more defensive and said I was bringing up irrelevant things to make him look bad. According to him, grabbing the steering wheel was just a joke that I took way too seriously. He said I was overreacting and that the bush incident wasn't even that bad. I was done arguing at this point. I told him that his behavior was not okay, drunk or not. I brought up how he had mocked me with Ashley's words right before grabbing the steering wheel the second time. He tried to interrupt me, but I kept going. I told him how terrified I was when the car crashed and how his laughter in that moment showed how little he cared about my safety. He stood up abruptly and said he needed to get some air before walking out. He turned back and said I should think about whether I wanted to continue this relationship if I couldn't handle his jokes, then slammed the door behind him. I didn't try to stop him from leaving. In fact, I felt relieved when he left. The whole morning just added to my doubts about our relationship. Not only did he refuse to take responsibility for his actions, but he also continued to compare me to his work wife and prioritize his relationship with her over ours. Update 1. It's been a week since Jason walked out after our argument about the steering wheel incident. He's been coming by to get his stuff a few times, always when I'm at work. Each time, he barely speaks to me, just takes a few pieces of clothing or his gaming gear, saying he's staying at his friend Ryan's until he figures out his next move. I've been avoiding social media for the past week, trying to sort things out in my head, but yesterday when scrolling through my feed, I saw his post. I couldn't believe my eyes when I started reading it. He had written a long, detailed story about how his girlfriend of 2 years suddenly turned cruel and abandoned him on a dark road in the middle of the night. He described how he had to walk for hours in the cold, how cars wouldn't stop to help him, and how he could have been killed. He even added that he was chased by a stray dog at some point, although I know that never happened because he didn't mention it when he showed up at my door that morning. The comments section was even worse than the post. People I've never met were calling me psychotic and abusive. Some were saying I should be charged with endangerment. Others were suggesting he sue me for abandonment, but what really bothered me were Ashley's comments. She had written at least 6 lengthy comments, each one worse than the last. In one comment, she talked about how she had always seen warning signs in my behavior, how I never let him have fun with his work friends. In another comment, she described instances where I allegedly controlled what he wore to work, which never happened. She kept replying to other comments with completely fabricated stories about me, painting a picture of me as a possessive, unstable girlfriend who finally revealed her true nature. The more I read, the angrier I got. There was no mention in his post about how drunk he was that night, nothing about him grabbing the steering wheel twice while I was driving, no explanation of how he made us crash into a bush and then laughed about it like it was hilarious. He didn't tell them about spending my taxi money on Ashley's expensive pizza order or making me drive 45 minutes at 2 a.m. to pick him up. He completely left out the part where he mocked me with Ashley's words right before grabbing the steering wheel the second time. I tried to call him immediately after reading the post. It went straight to voicemail. I called again and again. After the 5th attempt, I sent him a long message demanding he tell the whole truth about that night. No response. I waited an hour, getting more and more frustrated as more comments piled onto his post, all sympathizing with him and condemning me. Finally, I decided to call Ryan. I thought if Jason wouldn't talk to me, maybe Ryan could at least get him to edit the post to include the whole story, but when Ryan answered, things got so much worse. Ryan was confused when I mentioned Jason staying with him. He said he hadn't seen Jason in weeks, since their last game night. According to Ryan, Jason had never asked to crash at his place, and he definitely hadn't been there for the past week. I felt betrayed. My hands were shaking when I hung up with Ryan. All the times Jason had come by to get his stuff, all the casual mentions of staying at Ryan's, had been lies. I decided to call Sophie, my sister, and tell her the whole story. Sophie immediately arranged to come stay with me for a few days, saying I shouldn't face this situation alone. When she arrived, we sat down and read through all the nasty comments on Jason's post. Sophie had known Jason since we started dating and always had a bad feeling about him. She said I needed to tell my side of the story, to let people know the truth. While I was still thinking about what to do, I kept calling Jason. This time alternating between leaving angry voicemails and concerned ones. Where was he? Why would he lie about something like this? The last time he had come by to get his stuff was 2 days ago. He had taken his favorite outfit and his gaming laptop, telling me he was heading back to Ryan's to play some online games with friends. Now I'm sitting here replaying the conversation in my head, seeing all the little signs I missed, how he seemed more put together than someone supposedly sleeping on a friend's couch, how he always came at the same time, right after work, how his clothes never looked wrinkled or worn. I keep staring at Ashley's comments on his post, the way she fiercely defended him, the way she seemed to know exactly what to say to make me look bad. Especially, her final comment keeps echoing in my head, about how he deserves someone who understands him, someone who can match his energy and appreciate his sense of humor. Looking back at everything now, him not wanting me at the party, spending my money on her food, the constant mentions of her name, the lies about staying at Ryan's, it all adds up to something I didn't want to see before. I feel so stupid. All those times he came to get his stuff, he was probably going straight to her place. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Patricia, my elderly neighbor, carrying a plate of cookies and a pot of tea. She had seen me crying in the hallway that morning and had heard the argument between me and Jason. Patricia was 65 and had been living alone since her husband, a man I'd never met, left 20 years ago. She invited me for tea and listened to my whole story. When I finished, she told me about how her ex-husband had similar behaviors, disrespectful, manipulative, and blaming her for everything. She said if she had been brave enough to stand up for herself sooner, like I did, she might not have wasted 15 years in a toxic marriage. She invited me to join her pottery class on Wednesday evenings, something Jason always said was a waste of money whenever I mentioned it. I've stopped calling Jason now. His post is still up there, still collecting sympathetic comments and angry reactions toward me. Now I'm sitting here wondering how I missed so many red flags, how he gaslighted me into doubting whether I overreacted that night when he actually put both of us in danger. Maybe this whole social media drama is actually a blessing in disguise, showing me exactly who he is when he thinks he has everyone on his side. Update 2. After days of his misleading posts and hateful comments, I decided I was sick of being painted as the villain. With encouragement from Sophie and Patricia, a week ago, I sat down and wrote out the entire story from my perspective, making sure to include every detail that he had deliberately left out of his version. I started from the beginning, him refusing to let me come to the party because I don't drink and would clearly be a buzzkill. I described how he had spent my taxi money to buy Ashley a lavish meal, an extra-large pizza, multiple sides, dessert, and drinks. I explained about the 45-minute drive at 2 a.m. to pick him up and him making me wait while he helped Ashley look for a supposedly lost necklace. Then, I got to the important parts he had left out, how drunk he was, how he mocked me with Ashley's words about my mouth being too big, and most importantly, how he grabbed the steering wheel not just once but twice. I described in detail the crash into the bush, his laughter while I was terrified, and how he treated the whole thing like a joke. I made sure to explain that I only left him after he endangered both of us and refused to voluntarily get out of the car. Finally, I added the recent revelation about his lies regarding staying at Ryan's over the past week. I ended the post by asking whether anyone else would have reacted differently in my situation. The responses started pouring in. People began sharing my post and going back to his original post to call him out. Many pointed out how manipulative it was to leave out the drunk driving and steering wheel incidents. Some shared their own experiences with intoxicated partners who put them in danger, telling me I did the right thing by protecting myself. The tide really turned when people started questioning Ashley's many comments on his post. They criticized her for making up stories about me being controlling, especially after I mentioned I wasn't even allowed to attend the party. Some commenters suggested their relationship seemed too close for just work colleagues. At work, my boss, Greg, had noticed I seemed distracted lately and asked if everything was okay. I decided to share a condensed version of what was going on. He was very sympathetic and offered to get me involved in a new project that was starting, saying it might help me focus on something positive and that he was looking for someone to lead a small team for it, a promotion opportunity I had been hoping for. Last night, I was reading the responses when my phone rang. Jason's name flashed on the screen. When I answered, he immediately started raging about how I needed to take my post down right now. He said people at work were looking at him differently and that I was ruining his reputation. He kept insisting that regardless of what happened that night, I was wrong to leave him on the road. I let him rant until he ran out of steam, then calmly asked him where he had really been this week. He started stumbling over his words about crashing on couches between various friends' places, not wanting to burden any one person too long. I cut him off and told him I had spoken to Ryan, who hadn't seen him in weeks. There was a long pause, then I heard movement in the background and a familiar female voice saying something I couldn't quite make out. Before he could answer, there was some shuffling and suddenly, Ashley was on the phone. Her voice dripped with fake sympathy as she confirmed that yes, Jason had been staying with her this whole time. She said she was just being a good friend by giving him a safe place to stay after I had so cruelly abandoned him that night. She said I should be ashamed of myself for putting him in that situation and that a real girlfriend would never do that. That was when I finally lost my cool. I called her out for being a scheming relationship wrecker who had been trying to come between us from day one. I listed every instance, encouraging him to exclude me from work events, convincing him to spend my money on her food, fabricating lies about me in her comments, and now harboring him while he came to get his stuff under false pretenses. She dropped the sweet act immediately and started screaming back. She said I was just jealous because she and Jason had a special connection. According to her, they could talk about anything for hours, while he always found conversations with me boring. She said he needed someone fun and spontaneous like her, not a rigid person who couldn't even handle a harmless joke like grabbing the steering wheel during a fight. The call abruptly ended. I tried calling back multiple times, but it went straight to voicemail. I was shaking with anger, imagining them together on the other end, perhaps laughing at my reaction. I looked around my apartment and really saw all of his stuff for the first time. His gaming equipment was still in the corner of the living room. His clothes still took up half of my closet. His favorite coffee mug was still in the kitchen cabinet. All these things he hadn't taken during his supposed trips to Ryan's. I got every trash bag I could find and started filling them. His expensive gaming consoles and controllers in a bag, his rare edition books that he collected in a bag, all his clothes and shoes in bags. I found our matching bracelets from our first vacation in my jewelry box. Those went in too. Every trace of him, every gift he had given me, every item he had left at my place in over 2 years together, all went into those bags. I dragged everything down the stairs and left it next to the building's dumpster, then sent him one final message: "Your stuff is next to the dumpster. The garbage truck comes tomorrow morning at 8. What happens to it after that is no longer my concern." My hands were still shaking when I wrote this update. The reality of everything is finally sinking in. How he had spent this whole week going back and forth between my place and hers, lying to me each time. How they had probably sat together to create that misleading post about me, adding dramatic details like the fake dog chase to gain more sympathy. How each time he came to get his stuff, he was likely going straight to her place, both of them laughing about how easily I believed the Ryan story. But honestly, I don't regret leaving him on that road. If anything, knowing where he went afterward only confirms that I made the right choice. The only thing I regret is not seeing through their acts sooner. Thank you all for the supportive comments on my last post. You helped me see that I wasn't wrong to protect myself that night, and you gave me the courage to tell my story. I'm turning off my phone for the rest of the day and focusing on clearing every trace of him from my apartment. Update 3. It's been 3 months since I threw Jason's stuff out and I wasn't planning to update anymore, but yesterday I received some news that I felt I should share, if only to put this whole situation to rest. Ryan called me while I was at work. At first, I ignored his call because I was in a meeting, but then he sent a message saying it was urgent. When I called him back during my lunch break, he told me that Jason and Ashley had been in a serious car accident and were both in intensive care. According to Ryan, they had been at some house party last night, typical, and although completely intoxicated, Jason had decided to drive them home because Ashley had dared him to. They had crashed into a guardrail on the highway at high speed. The car was totaled. Before I go into my feelings about this, I should explain what happened after my last update. The morning after I left his stuff next to the dumpster, Jason showed up around 7 a.m. to collect everything. Ashley was with him, of course, in her silver Honda. I watched from my window as they loaded all the bags into her car. She kept touching his arm while they worked, and whenever she noticed me watching, she would glare up at my window. They took every single bag, even the one with the matching bracelets. That was the last time I saw either of them. After that day, I went completely no contact. I blocked both of them everywhere: phone numbers, social media, email addresses, even LinkedIn. I switched gyms because mine was too close to their office. I started shopping at a different grocery store to avoid any accidental encounters. I needed the complete break for my sanity. The past 3 months have been full of changes. I got promoted to project manager at work, which keeps me busy with new challenges. I started attending Patricia's pottery classes every Wednesday evening, something I always wanted to try but Jason said was a waste of money. I adopted Luna, a sweet golden retriever, from the local shelter, who likes to lie at my feet while I work from home. Life has been peaceful, productive, and drama-free. So, when Ryan called yesterday with news of the accident, I felt strangely detached from the whole situation. He described how bad the accident was, how the fire department had to cut them out of the car, how both were still unconscious with multiple injuries, then asked if I had any plans to visit them in the hospital. I actually laughed out loud. I asked him why I would visit someone who endangered my life by grabbing my steering wheel, spent weeks lying about where he was staying, let his work wife spread lies about me online, and then dumped me after a 2-year relationship, not to mention the woman who encouraged all his worst behaviors right up until they drove her into intensive care, too. Ryan tried to make me feel guilty, but honestly, the man on that hospital bed is a stranger to me now. I told Ryan about my busy schedule, pottery class that evening, a team celebration for my promotion this weekend, and a furniture shopping trip with Sophie next week. My life didn't stop when Jason finally faced the consequences of his actions. It sounds cold, but I'm not the person who will drop everything to drive 45 minutes at 2 a.m. to pick up a drunk boyfriend who just spent my money on another woman. The parallels between then and now are striking. Both times, he was intoxicated and making reckless decisions on the road, but this time, instead of me being there to deal with the aftermath, it was Ashley, the same Ashley who called me boring for not drinking, who said grabbing the steering wheel was just a harmless joke, who claimed they had a special connection that I couldn't understand. I wonder if she still thinks his drunk driving is funny now that they're both in intensive care. Sometimes I really want to dig up their old social media posts about how cruelly I abandoned him that night. I want to comment about how that tough love moment might have saved both our lives, but I won't give them the satisfaction. I'm done being a part of their story. I'm sharing this update for anyone else who might be doubting themselves in a similar situation, wondering if they were too harsh in setting boundaries, feeling guilty for choosing their safety over someone else's comfort. You're not wrong for protecting yourself. Sometimes the harshest decisions are the healthiest ones. Luna is stretching out on my desk as I write this, occasionally pawing at my fingers for attention. In a few hours, I'll be at Patricia's pottery class, where I'm finally getting good at centering clay on the wheel. Tomorrow, I have a meeting about expanding my team for the new project. Next week, I'll be looking at apartments in a better neighborhood. This is my life now, and I wouldn't change it for anything. So, no, I will not be visiting them in the hospital. I will not be sending flowers or cards. I will not be checking social media for updates on their condition. They made their choices, just like I made mine 3 months ago. The only difference is I made choices that let me sleep well at night. Thank you all for the support throughout this journey.